You thought he was done? You thought the takes were too hot to handle? You better think again. He's back with even more scorching opinions, more controversial predictions, and the kind of truth bombs that only Zain Bando can deliver. If you missed the first round, prepare yourself. This is the follow-up you've been waiting for. It's time for Zain Zinger Part 2, another certified hit from the Empty the Bench Network. Here's your host, Zain Bando.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. This is Zain Zinger Part 2. My name is Zain Bando. Happy Sunday morning to you all, or afternoon, wherever you might be listening, around the country and around the world on this fine Sunday, May 17th, 2026. Hope you all are doing well. Just a few quick reminders before we get started with the stream. Zain Zinger Part 2 is an extension of Bando's Breakdowns, which airs every Friday here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. And speaking of Bando's Breakdowns, just as a reminder, you can listen to that show wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can subscribe to all things ETB at youtube.com/ETB Network. Of course, you can also check out this very live stream, Zain Zinger Part 2, on a lot of different platforms, including YouTube and X. So speaking of that, we are on YouTube. We are on the ETB Network YouTube channel. We are also on my YouTube channel and on Twitter this morning. We are on my Twitter account, the ETB Network Twitter account, Bando's Breakdowns, ETB Sports, and, of course, the MMA Outsiders. All right, without further ado, just one final reminder for a housekeeping note before we get started. Episode 91 of Bando's Breakdowns will air this Friday, May 22nd, 3 Eastern, noon Pacific. No special guest planned at this moment, so it will just be a regular episode of Bando's Breakdowns. And speaking of having to pivot, we were supposed to have a special guest on today, and in fact, I'll just reveal who it was supposed to be. I was supposed to have Colby Covington on the program today, but unfortunately, some things fell through on his end. We're going to try to reschedule that as soon as we possibly can. But for now, though, we have a full Zain Zinger Part 2 stream, so let's get into it without further ado. The big breaking news off the top of the stream, and shout out to the 79 people who are already in here checking this out. It is official, ladies and gentlemen. Conor McGregor is back in mixed martial arts. The UFC and McGregor reached a deal. It was announced Saturday night during UFC Vegas 117 by UFC CEO Dana White. It had been hinted at for weeks and months within the MMA community. For those in the know that this fight was being targeted for quite a bit. Max Holloway, the former UFC BMF champion, the former UFC featherweight champion of the world, and the former UFC interim lightweight champion of the world as well. Holloway looking to bounce back after a loss to Charles Oliveira. Looking over at the Conor McGregor side of things, as we know, Conor McGregor became the first fighter in UFC history to hold 2 belts simultaneously. That was all the way back in 2016 when he was the UFC featherweight and UFC lightweight champion, defeating the likes of Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, Nate Diaz, etc., etc. Beat a who's who list in that era at that time. has not fought in the UFC since July of 2021. In fact, I was at that fight. The poster for that fight is to my left here next to my door. I can talk about my McGregor fight week experience in just a little bit because I have a unique perspective that only few people really get a chance to see. When I say that the McGregor fight weeks are weeks that you can only, you have to, it's that old saying, you had to be there type of a thing. Well, my one and only McGregor fight week to this point, assuming nothing crazy happens with this and I end up going to this, I don't know if I will or not, but if it doesn't come to fruition, I can tell you that it's one of those weeks where you had to be there. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But I want to talk about what I believe this fight actually means for the future of not just both guys, but for the UFC in general. More of a big picture item with this. So obviously, July 11th will be UFC 329, as it says in the banner. But July 11th is a very special day for the UFC. It's held some of its biggest events of all time on that date, including UFC 100. That was Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir. And of course, also UFC 189, which was the aforementioned Conor McGregor, Chad Mendes UFC interim title fight, which saw Conor McGregor defeat Chad Mendes by TKO, which obviously led to him fighting Aldo in the unification fight later on that year at UFC 194. My point in bringing that up is the special moments on July 11th for the UFC usually happen. You had a record-breaking UFC event for UFC 100. You had that, obviously, that Brock Lesnar-Frank Mir rivalry. They fought twice. And, of course, Lesnar won the second one. The third fight never came to fruition because Frank Mir failed to win the UFC interim heavyweight championship at the time. He fought Shane Carwin, and Shane Carwin knocked him out, which set up the Shane Carwin-Brock Lesnar fight in July of 2010. My point in bringing that up is July 11th for the UFC typically creates unimaginable storylines, as I've already alluded to. And this fight, going back to it, certainly does that. Max Holloway went on a 6-year unbeaten streak after losing to Conor McGregor in 2013. That was the first time they fought. August of 2013. They were kids. They had barely started in the UFC at that point. Holloway was 20 years old, I think, at that point. McGregor may have had, I think, 1 or 2 fights to that point, famously knocking out Marcus Brimage in his UFC debut. So they were very green, as the MMA community likes to throw that term around. Green means you're kind of you don't really know who you are yet. And obviously, McGregor went on a totally opposite trajectory. He was built up and he became a big star, and the Poirier knockout kind of put him, on a stratospheric pace. Obviously beats Dennis Seaver and then, of course, gets the title shots shortly after that. So obviously both of their careers were elevated the first time they fought. And now looking at them, years later, it's going to be almost 13 years later exactly to when they fought the first time. Not 13 years exactly, but pretty darn close. You'll be a month and a couple days off from the first time they fought. But looking at them now, it's completely different. They obviously have had storied careers in the octagon. Obviously, McGregor outside of the octagon is at a little bit more of a tumultuous time outside of it. Holloway really has not been known to get into any sort of legal trouble or anything like that. And it's always fought a who's who list of the best guys in the world. Who has more to lose in this fight, to me, is Conor McGregor. There's a couple reasons for this. Conor McGregor has not won a fight since January of 2020. He hasn't won a meaningful fight since November of 2016. That's a long time ago, okay? He's fresh off three losses in his last 4 fights, with 2 of them coming to Poirier and the other coming to Khabib. And by the way, shout out to the 100 people that just joined. I really appreciate it. We'll probably go till about 10:35, 10:40 Central Time. But anyway, back to what I was saying. He's lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. What does that mean for him? Well, it's gigantic because we don't know whether the McGregor of 2020, let alone 2016, has it in him a couple more times with 2 fights left on his current UFC deal to make a statement, because here is the scenario I think at play for McGregor, and people could hate this scenario all they want. They say, "Oh, Zan, it's undeserved." I'm going to explain why I think the UFC will target what I think they're going to target should McGregor win. Okay, so here's the scenario that I think the UFC is trying to mess with here. So let's say, and by the way, this isn't 170 pounds. Okay, so watch where I'm going with this. There's a rumor going around. It hasn't been officially confirmed, but in August, let's hypothetically say that Islam Makhachev fights Ian Gary in Philadelphia for Makhachev's welterweight title. Okay, I think I know what the UFC is trying to do here. If McGregor somehow looks vintage and beats Holloway in 2 minutes, and it's like emphatic, and the fight isn't even close, and he TKOs him, and it's this viral finish, and McGregor gets his storybook comeback and all this stuff, and he wins that fight, there's a good chance, in my opinion, that the UFC is going to tell the likes of Carlos Prates and not Ian Gary, because we're assuming in this scenario that Ian Gary will have fought Makhachev. I think they're going to tell the rest of the division, hey, look, okay, we only have so many more opportunities that we can capitalize on McGregor. We're going to put him in a title fight against Islam Makhachev. And I know it's a bold proclamation, given that it doesn't make sense in the rankings, but let's think about this. The UFC has been in a bit of a rut, okay, until this past weekend, not last night, but the weekend before, with Strickland and Hamzat, okay? A lot of people were really worried about the current state of the UFC, where the UFC was headed, different variations like that. The Strickland Chimaev fight, whatever you want to say about it, whatever you want to say about the buildup being manufactured, whatever the case is, the fight delivered. The fight was close. It got people talking about it. That is exactly what Paramount executives want. That's exactly what the UFC wants. That's exactly what TKO wants. Because for any new UFC consumer that maybe has never seen this before and needs something to get excited about, or you're maybe a fan that's been checked out of the sport for 10 years, okay? This is as big of a nostalgia play as you could possibly think of. McGregor is the biggest global draw that the UFC has ever had. He broke a pay-per-view record, not just for boxing Floyd Mayweather, but for fighting against Khabib Nurmagomedov when Khabib Nurmagomedov was at the height of his career. That did 2.4 million buys. Now strip all that out for a second. Take all that out of the equation for just a second. 2.4 million buys in 2018. Okay, massive number. We're now in 2026. It's an all streaming model, right? Think about that. All streaming model going forward. Okay, that means that you're only paying $8.99 a month to watch the return of Conor McGregor. Could you imagine the subscriber boost for this event, knowing that you don't have to pay pay-per-view? You don't have to go through extra hurdles just to buy it. You don't have to worry about going to a bar. If you don't want to go to a bar, people can sit in their houses. They can watch this fight, and it'll be one of the most streamed fights ever. And you want to talk about the perfect 1-2 play here? You can say anything you want about the White House card, but here's the fact of the matter. People will watch the White House card 1 month before that for the spectacle because it's at the White House. Okay, some people don't even care who's on the card. Okay, and for the hardcores, we do care who's on the card. It's a really, really solid top of the card. Okay, a lot of people had their issues with it, but from a fight standpoint, those last 2 fights, Topuria and Gaethje and Pereira and Gane are solid fights. Okay, I'm not taking anything away from those 4 guys. My point in saying that is they're going to watch the White House card for nostalgia. Or no, they're going to watch the White House card for spectacle. They're going to watch Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway for a little bit of that nostalgia kick. Okay? And could you imagine if Conor McGregor knocks out Max Holloway? I'm just saying, if he somehow knocks out Max Holloway, and by the way, if you looked at the way too early odds for this fight, Conor McGregor is a massive underdog. Vegas does not think he can do this whatsoever. And I think plus 350 If McGregor still has his left hook intact, oh my, that might be a worthy play. I really believe that, just given how much of a freak accident his last fight was, because it really was that. Okay, so my point in saying all of this is simple. All right, so should he win, okay, it sets up this chaotic boom where there is no way the fall could be a failure. Okay. So you could have a fall where you have Alexander Volkanovski fighting Ron Murphy in well, I probably shouldn't say where it is, but I know where that fight is more than likely going to be. So Volk versus Murphy in an undisclosed location in September. Okay, October we know the bigger numbered event that month is going to be Abu Dhabi. There's tons of rumors about what that main event could be. You know, whether it's the Hamzat Strickland rematch, which I would think it would be. That would make a lot of sense. If Hamzat doesn't move to light heavyweight, I have no idea what the UFC will do there. So there's that. But November and December are the major question marks. And it goes back to my original point. The UFC knows that they have to strike where it's hot. If McGregor wins and it's a viral finish and everybody's talking about it, Makhachev to me is the fight. And even if Makhachev destroys McGregor, which is very likely to happen, the UFC can say, okay, we used our biggest star one last time. We put him in a title fight, and the whole world saw that fight. So I think it's bigger than just the fight. It's everything around the fight. Okay. It's the rivalry standpoint. It's the reunion of 13 years. It's McGregor coming back to the UFC, presumably for the first time in 5 years. There's a lot going on with this fight that I don't think a lot of people are fully grasping, which is what makes this extremely fascinating to me. So I'm not going to give a pick on this fight just yet or anything like that. But what I can tell you is the buildup to this fight is going to be insane. To have this fight be right after UFC Freedom 250, nearly a month after it, and to have all these new fans potentially tune in to what should be an exciting Lighthouse card, it'll make people want to come back. This is as a good of a summer power play as the UFC could have hoped for, and now TKO can cash in on all these new subscribers. You already know the hotel rates are going to be crazy, and you already know that the T-Mobile Arena and MGM that whole week is going to be a freaking madhouse. So speaking of that, that's a perfect segue. So I went to the Poirier-McGregor trilogy fight. Okay, it was I've only ever been to Vegas twice, and that was the first time I ever went. So this was in July of 2021, and I got the tickets in April, and it was unbelievable. I mean, you want to talk about the scene? I'll never, for as long as I live, I'm never going to forget the plane pulling in and seeing MGM to the far right. That was really cool. First off, and then you want to talk about just the freaking scenes in Vegas the whole week. I think I was there. I think it was Wednesday to Monday or something. I'd have to go back, but I think it was Wednesday to Monday. Anyway, in saying that, the scenes in Vegas that week were just unfreaking believable. You had Conor McGregor billboards every 30 feet where you could go look. The press conference was a freaking zoo. There were thousands of people outside the MGM, and people were running in to go to that press conference. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was insane. Then the next day was the weigh-in. The same thing. People ran in to the venue to watch that. And then my biggest regret from that weekend, and it's something I've never made the mistake of doing since, is not going for the first prelim of the night. I went probably midway through the prelims and stuff like that, but it was still a chaotic scene because even getting in to the T-Mobile Arena that night, even midway through the undercard, was a freaking zoo. Everybody that wanted to go to that fight went, and it was like people were sprinting in. People were that excited to go to that fight, and I've never seen Vegas so in tuned with a single fight. Like, I'll even go back a couple of days. I'm at the pool at the MGM right? I'm at the pool and some guy looks over at his buddy and he goes, "Hey, did you know Conor McGregor is fighting this weekend?" And he goes, "No, I'm not really into that." He goes, "Dude, everywhere you look this week on your trip, that's all you're gonna see." And the guy was like blown away when his buddy said that. So when I tell you that the McGregor fever takes over Las Vegas whenever he fights, I have living proof of it. So if you're thinking about going to this fight, think about getting your accommodations now. It's a bit late for the UFC to announce this. They announced his previous fight in April of 2021. I went back and verified the date. It was mid-April 2021. Now this is a little bit later, so just keep that in mind. Should be fun. I don't have a pick for this yet, but it should be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see what happens. Moving on to the other big star of the past, Ronda Rousey returns to MMA for the first time since December of 2016. We all know the story. Loses in upset fashion to Holly Holm, which means she lost her title in the process. Then, of course, loses to Amanda Nunes at UFC 207, retiring from the UFC, and then eventually moving over to the WWE, where she had a successful career. And then there you go. I mean, that's basically the story there. She comes back, obviously almost a decade later, fights Gina Carano. Gina Carano had not been in MMA since August of '09, so that was a major deal for her. And then obviously, just talking about the fight was really quick. Gina Carano comes out, tries to throw a kick. Ronda Rousey catches it, then of course takes her to the ground. Gina Carano had her in a brief guillotine, and then of course, sure enough, Ronda Rousey pops her head out. Obviously, of course, goes in, mounts her, lands a few punches, finds the armbar, gets the submission win, and Ronda Rousey retires again. She finishes her MMA career with 13 wins, with 10 of them by submission. And yeah, I mean, that's really all you can. That's all you can ask for if you're a Ronda Rousey fan. I mean, that was as flawless of a storybook ending as you could possibly imagine. And there's a lot of talk online that the fight was, choreographed or fixed or all that. Well, first off, there's no proof that it was fixed. Number one. Number two, if you remember back in Ronda's heyday, her viral finishes were what made her famous. She would win fights in 20 seconds and 30 seconds and 15 seconds and stuff like that, where you didn't know how fast it was going to be. You just couldn't leave your TV, almost like Mike Tyson, where you didn't know when Mike Tyson was going to knock his opponent out. So you never know. But what I can tell you is this was not what Netflix was hoping for, I would think, because Ronda said after the fight that she was done. But then Nikita Badarian goes and says, "Hey, if I can try to get her back, let's see if we can make the Holly Holm fight happen." Well, Holly Holm has to fight Stephanie Han. That's going to be interesting as well. And we don't know how that's going to go, of course. But I think looking at this, there was no other way that this Rousey-Carano fight was going to go. It was a super easy win for Ronda. Gina said never say never, but it doesn't seem like she's going to come back to MMA. I think this was her way of saying thank you to the sport by Pioneer fighting Pioneer. That's just my opinion of it. We'll see what happens, but overall, an expected ending in the main event. Looking down the rest of the card, Mike Perry defeated Nate Diaz by a doctor stoppage. Seems like Mike Perry is interested in fighting Jake Paul in MMA. Will that happen? I'm not sure. I think that would be stupid. And then, of course, Francis Ngannou knocking out Felipe Wins, devastating knockout in the first round. Ngannou calls out John Jones. Obviously, we know the story with those two. They were supposed to fight in 2023. Obviously, Francis Ngannou had a contract dispute with the UFC, so that fight didn't happen. Ngannou moved on. John Jones ended up becoming the vacant UFC heavyweight champion, and then, of course, defending it once against Stipe Miocic before his saga with Tom Aspinall and Alex Pereira eventually began. So there's a lot of questions there. Will John Jones get out of his UFC deal, which a lot of people are saying is not possible because he signed I think it was an 8-fight deal a couple years ago. which means he has 6 fights left, and he doesn't think, or MMA analysts are starting to think that Jones will never get out of his deal. So we'll see what happens. It's more of a dream fight than anything, but we'll see. Overall, card was actually quite entertaining. The prelims were really good as well. Parnas looked amazing against Kenneth Cross too. Wanted to shout him out. And then, of course, Rebellis to Spain, brutally knocking out former UFC heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos. And then, of course, Jason Jackson brutally knocking out Jeff Creighton. Overall, there were a lot of exciting finishes on this card. I went 9-2 on this card. And speaking of records, let's talk about UFC Vegas 117. We'll be a couple more minutes here on the stream. UFC Vegas 117 was last night, as we know, as I alluded to earlier in the stream. Dana White announced the McGregor-Holloway fight during that event. But, of course, the big storyline off that event is Arnold Allen getting back in the win column against Costa by decision. Overall, a dominant win for Arnold Allen. Used his wrestling really well, used his top control well, struck Costa really, really effectively. Costa's known as like a nasty finisher and, of course, a knockout artist. Couldn't really get close to Allen there. Overall, a decent main event. I went 7-6 on this card. We're still doing terrible on main event predictions. We're now down to 6-10 on the year through 16 UFC events. So hopefully we can start to pick it up in the summer. I got to get back to 500 in that category because it is bothering the crap out of me that we're not good in that. But 7-6 though, so now we're at 116 wins on the year. I'm pretty sure we went into the weekend with 109. So I'm feeling good that we're starting to get more consistent, and hopefully we'll get some more above 500 clips. There's not going to be a UFC event next week because of the Bob Menery Johnny Manziel fight. So we'll see how that plays out. That's going to be at the Apex as well. That's a brand risk fight. So anyway, to round out the stream, the NBA and NHL playoffs, let's talk about it from an overview standpoint. Today is the day. Pistons and the Cavaliers in Game 7. The winner of that will take on the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals. San Antonio has moved on against Minnesota. They won in 6 games. So it'll be San Antonio versus OKC in the Western Conference Final. Looking over at the NHL playoffs took an interesting turn. Sabres forced Game 7 with the Canadiens. They did so on Saturday night. Buffalo wins the game 8-3 to force that inevitable Game 7, which is tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern. The winner of that series will take on, of course, the Carolina Hurricanes, who have yet to lose a game in this postseason. And then, of course, looking over at the Western Conference Final as well, it'll be the Vegas Golden Knights taking on the Colorado Avalanche. And that series will begin, let's see when it'll begin. It'll begin on Wednesday, May 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern. That'll be Game 1 in Denver. And, of course, the winners of those will go to the Stanley Cup Final. A lot of people think it's going to be Colorado versus Carolina. We shall see what happens with those series. And then, of course, the Bears' schedule is officially out. It's one of the toughest in the NFL. Just a brief reaction to it. Some of the notable games worth looking at. So let's take a look at the schedule. We'll give you my way too early prediction for the season. All right, here we go. So skipping over the preseason here. It opens on the road with the Panthers. I say the Bears win, so the Bears are 1-0. It takes on the Vikings at Soldier Field. I'm going to say the Bears are 2-0. Plays the Eagles at Soldier Field. I think the Bears are 2-1. Takes on the Jets. I think the Bears are 3-1. Takes on Green Bay. I think the Bears are 3-2 after that. Plays the Falcons in Atlanta. I think the Bears are 4-2. Plays the Patriots on Thursday Night Football, October 22nd. I think the Bears are 5-2. Then they go to Seattle. I think they lose to the Seahawks. The Bears are 5-3. They play Tampa Bay. I think the Bears are 6-3 going into the bye. They play the New Orleans Saints. They're 7-3. They play Detroit at Detroit. I think the Bears win on Thanksgiving. The Bears are 8-3. They play the Jaguars at home to begin the month of December. I think the Bears win. So the Bears are 9-3 going into the midway point of December. I think the Bears beat the Miami Dolphins. So the Bears are 10-3. I think it gets upset by the Bills in Buffalo. So I think the Bears are 10-4. And then I think the Bears win its final 3 games to finish the regular season 13-4 and hopefully enough to win the NFC North. And by the way, those final 3 divisional games are Green Bay, Detroit, and at Minnesota. So if the Bears need any payback, there it is. Speaking of payback, the White Sox did exactly that yesterday against the Cubs, winning that game 8-3. The rubber match today is at 2:10 p.m. Eastern on the south side. And of course, the Cubs, after this, will take on the Brewers to begin the week and round out the week against Houston. The Cubs are 29-17. This is the first of 2 Crosstown League Series games, as the Cubs will play the White Sox in August at Wrigley Field to close out the rivalry for 2026. So we shall see what happens there. That's going to do it, though, for another edition of Zan Zinger Part 2. Thank you so much for tuning in. The 121 people that tuned in this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. Really appreciate your guys' time. You could catch this episode right now. As soon as it's done airing, it'll be on YouTube and it'll be on all the X platforms, just like I mentioned as well. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. Really does help us out a lot when you guys tune in right away and hear my analysis every single Sunday morning. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I meant to do this earlier in the stream. Let's take care of this because we have a big stream tonight. It is going to be the ETB Lounge. Well, let's take a look at what is in store on that if we can. Give me just a second. I forgot to mention this as well. This will be tonight. So tonight, Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. The weekend is almost over, but the conversation is just heating up. Kick back with the ETB Lounge with Kellen McCormick and Nick DiMartino every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Join us for a 3-hour live format where we unite the full panel of ETB to break down a pivotal day in sports, from the prestige narratives of major championships and MLB afternoon slates to the chaos of the NBA playoff picture. We cover it all, whether you're here for the happy hour of prestige or the spillage where we roast the day's biggest blunders and gambling bad beats. The Lounge is your home for sports therapy. And of course, it's only on the ETB network. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ETB network. There you go. So that'll do it for another edition of Zan Zinger. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Zain Bando. We will see you back here next Sunday, and we will see you again for the newest episode of Bando's Breakdowns, episode 91, that will drop this Friday. More to come on that in the days ahead. But for now, take care. Have a good rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.